I think we're ready to rock and roll then. Yes, gentlemen? Okay.
All right.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Scotch Talk. I'm Jack Fowler. I am pinch hitting for the great Jeremy Beer, who is otherwise engaged today. I am the director of the Center for Civil Society at American Philanthropic and author of its Civil Thoughts weekly email newsletter. I'll give you some info on that later. I'm joined by two truly distinguished colleagues, Doug Schneider and Austin Detwiler. Hello, friends. We should get started by each admitting what we are drinking. This is a show with a libation in the title. So, Austin, why don't you tell us what's there?
I just have a glass of scotch here. I'm drinking Ardbeg. It is a bit warm for that, but it's the nicest thing I had around. I figured conversation with you, Jack, deserved a good glass of scotch.
Oh, well, may deserve four glasses by the end of it. Doug, what are you doing?
I have a gin and tonic, Hendrix. It's a beautiful day here in Delaware where I live, and almost has a summer-esque feel, so I went with a G&T.
Molto bene. I am the wimp of this trio. It's 2:00. I'm out in Colorado at the Philanthropy Roundtable at the Broadmoor. Beautiful, but Diet Dr. Pepper. Hey, it's a tasty drink. Hey, it's October 14th. Good time of year to discuss the thing. What are we promising to discuss today? I'm going to literally read what we promised. People are joining us on Scotch Talk today for a discussion on 2022 planning and reviewing your nonprofit's work so far this year. Doug and Austin both have black belts in strategic planning, but before we get into some of the questions, and I'll be throwing out the questions to them, and folks, if you have questions, I guess I'm going to get them somehow through chat. But Doug, why don't we start with you, bowing to your legacy and duration at American Philanthropic. Tell us quickly about yourself.
Sure. Doug Schneider, I'm a managing partner at the firm. I've actually been with American Philanthropic, not since its inception, but soon thereafter, joined in August 2009, and married, 4 kids, ages 11 to 18. So life is absolutely nonstop. If I'm not working, I'm typically driving to a soccer practice somewhere.
Yes.
And live in Delaware. Work out of our Philadelphia office, which is really in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And worked with a number of clients over the years, doing a whole host of things, but for one reason or another have somehow found myself doing a lot of our strategic planning engagements, both organizational strategic plans and development plans. And if I have free time, which is not a whole lot these days, I'll try to catch a Premier League soccer game on the weekends. It's a rarity, and I really enjoy hiking and being outside in the woods. So that's kind of that's my happy place.
Doug, did anyone ever tell you that soccer is a socialist sport? So
you have told me that, Jack.
Yeah, okay.
It's also the beautiful game. So
it is.
You have to weigh those two things.
Austin, give us your down and dirty on yourself and your strategic planning chops.
Yeah, I'm a managing consultant at American Philanthropic. I've been here a little over 3 years now, and over that time, I've done several strategic plans. Again, just started sort of organically, and whether it's strange or not, it's my favorite thing we do. I find it super exciting. So nothing better to do than to have a glass of scotch and talk about strategic planning, especially this time of the year. I also work out of our Philadelphia office. I actually also live in Philadelphia, or just outside of the city. Also married. I have 3 kids. They are somewhere between 5 months and 5 years, all of them. So also very busy here, learning to sleep with all of them. And what do I do in my free time? When I find it, reading as much as I can, and pretending to go for runs once in a while, but that never happens anymore. Usually just wrestling with the kids is the main thing. They're all boys, so the main thing we can do is wrestle.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, I'm the old man here, and I've got 5 kids. They're all 21 years and older. We live in Milford, Connecticut. Most of my kids are around there. All are around. They love each other dearly. I endured, maybe that's wrong. I'm poisoning things. I went through a strategic planning process when I was at National Review, which I had been for 30 or so years, at the able and capable hands of Doug Schneider once upon a time. So I've experienced Doug's wisdom and guidance in this area. So why don't we get started, Doug, with you as the old pro here. Why don't you just tell us, first of all, what is a strategic plan? Let me preface this just by saying I am on several nonprofit boards. One of them is almost 50 years old. I've been on at least 3 nonprofits that did not have a strategic plan. How they continue to exist is beyond me. But not everyone in a nonprofit, maybe not everyone watching this today, are with an organization that actually has a strategic plan, and they may have some preconceptions about what that is, or it isn't. But why don't you tell us what a strategic plan actually is?
Okay, so this is not the Webster's dictionary definition of a strategic plan, but what I would say is strategic plan is basically an organizational document or set of documents that can be enacted upon and followed to reach objectives and goals that leadership and organization, board or management sets out. And I think the key thing for strategic planning is and a strategic plan in and of itself, it's not just a wish list. It's not just, everyone wants to accomplish certain things, raise a certain amount of money, have a certain number of donors, launch this initiative, do that project. The key thing there's a lot of key things with strategic plans, but it's the how. What are the strategies? I mean, there's a reason it's called a strategic plan, because there are specific strategies that will be determined and that you will follow. And then flowing from that are a series of basically activities and tactics, getting down to the brass tacks of what you do day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. But really, it's an organizational guiding document for a set period of time. I mean, that's one thing about strategic plan is they have end dates, and at least in our work, you don't want to go so far out. I think visionary statements and documents going many years out, maybe even decades out. But for our work, we found it best typically 3 to 5 years is a really good time frame for a strategic plan. But it's codified. I mean, that's really the key thing. The strategic plan is codified, it's followed, and then there typically are going to be organizational documents that hold those executing the plan accountable. And we'll get into all that. But
yeah, okay. Yeah, I do want to get back a point. You said it's followed, and I have a feeling that's something we need to discuss, because some organizations can actually go through the process of creating a strategic plan and then maybe stick it in a drawer somewhere. Austin, let's assume that most organizations operate on a calendar year basis, and let's take an organization, obviously, that for the sake of this argument has a strategic plan. Why is now, the middle of October, a good time to be looking ahead to the next year? Is even thinking an annual, basis the best way to proceed? Is it too? This is all one lump of a question, but is now the right time of year to start looking at it, as opposed to December or as opposed to August? Maybe August is too early. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no wrong time to do planning, right? Like if you're inspired right now to start planning, start planning. It doesn't matter when your fiscal year is or where you are in the year, do something. That said, planning, it's a long-term process. It takes, 2 to 4 months to do it well. And so and we'll talk more about why that is, everything that goes into a plan. But if you're putting together a plan 3 months before your new fiscal year starts, you're going to end up getting into the new fiscal year before your plan's really ready. And that changes, all your budgeting for that year ahead, your hiring plans, what vendors you're working with and everything. So you definitely don't do it last minute. December is not a good time to be planning. But if you can do it 6 months ahead of the fiscal year, that's outstanding, right? Okay. Spend 4 months doing a real plan, and then you've got 2 months to look at your plan as you enter into the new fiscal year.
Well, we're making we've made a statement here in the lead up to this Scotch Talk that now is a good time to review, to look back. And I don't take any opposition to that comment, but maybe we should talk a little bit about reviewing, looking backwards, reviewing the what's happened so far in the past year. I mean, how frequently someone who has an organization that has a strategic plan that hasn't stuck it in a drawer, what guidance would you give to them to here's how you should be reviewing it on a regular basis? How would you counsel an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there's two thoughts on that. I also want to qualify the thing I said a moment ago. Doug has a really good piece on Philanthropy Daily, the nonprofit publication that American Philanthropic puts out, about how to do a strategic plan right now. So sort of like quick and dirty version. If you don't have time to do the full thing, if you're not engaging outside support, here's a high level overview of what questions to ask. We can do that quickly. We can share that article afterwards too. You can do it fast. But once you've got that plan in place, whether you've done full on process of really diving in and putting the right thing together, or even you have the quick version, you want to be updating it quarterly. So to your question, Jack, we said now's a good time to be reviewing. Beginning of Q4, you're looking back at the last 3 quarters, you're seeing how your numbers look going into Q4, and you're adjusting, right? Typically, after you've created a plan, you want to give somebody that plan and say, you're the steward of this plan, right? That's somebody sort of in middle to upper management whose job it is to own the plan, keep the trains arriving on time, let their bosses know what's missing, what's not happening, and keep people below them accountable.
Doug, we obviously, folks, we went a little back and forth beforehand. No one's getting a surprise, but Doug had mentioned that it might be good to bring up and discuss ways in which strategic plans are useful. So I think what I'd like to, let me put these 2 topics out here, and Doug, you take them on, and then Austin. So back on that, what ways are strategic plans useful to an organization? And then another thing you wrote, Doug, is that planning is as much about what not to do as it is what to do.
Sure.
So if you take both of those on.
Yeah, I mean, so how strategic plans are useful. I mean, there's a number of things that one could say in answering that question. A few though.
Excuse me, Doug, could you hold one second? I'm being ordered. Tell folks to put their questions in the Q&A. Okay, sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would say, I mean, there's a couple things, and what I'd say first is if you want to go somewhere, it's best to have a roadmap, right? I mean, typically, if without something that you're shooting for and something that you can measure your actions and your activities and the investments you're making, it's really, I mean, just think about, like, I use the analogy of just like driving someplace, right? Like I could drive to the middle of Montana, right, and I could go without a roadmap and without Google Maps or whatever, and I'd probably get there. I could follow the sun. I'd probably take a lot of wrong turns. I'd waste a lot of resources, a lot of gas money. It'd take me probably 4 times as long, right? And if you follow a map, you know where to turn, when to turn, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a plan's very similar to that. So, I mean, it's just kind of like common sense. If you want to know where you're going, it's best to have a plan. Now, where the particulars of that, matter. I would say the other things, though, that a lot of people don't think about with regard to planning are, it can be a very unifying factor for staff. I think having a plan that people know about and is shared internally can be good for company culture, organizational culture. I think it's good for staff to know, why they're doing what they're doing, why they're being asked to make this investment or spend their time here, or what name you. I think that it can be very good from just a management standpoint with regard to staff to get buy-in, camaraderie, et cetera. But I'll also say, even at the board level, having a strategic plan, it keeps you from looking at shiny objects. because there's a lot of shiny
Mhm.
objects out there. And often what happens is, you start moving down the path and you say, we want to accomplish X, Y, or Z. But then, halfway along the way, something else comes, and you can have the plan to measure against, what that thing is. It might be worth doing, by the way, but it may not be. And I think you need to measure against the plan. Does this help us reach our goals and objectives? If so, then you can figure out, how you're going to do that thing. But if not, it makes saying no really easy. And it kind of alleviates sometimes certain internal pressures that can mount to do something that's really not, it may not be a bad thing to do. It just may not be the most beneficial thing to do. So having a strategic plan is, of course, if executed properly, it's going to help you achieve your objectives and do what you set out to do. But it's also, I think, really good from a staff standpoint, for the company culture, and to help say no to things.
I want to just jump in on that with two thoughts, actually. So Peter Drucker, the great 20th century management consultant, sometimes really insightful, sometimes maybe less, but you can take it or leave it. He has one provocative quote that I really like, where he says, planning is invaluable, plans are worthless. It's a little overstated, plans aren't worthless, but his point that planning is the real crux of the matter is essential to understand, right? Like, this is where we get the buy-in from leadership and staff, and they're super valuable, like Doug says, for avoiding shiny objects. But you can only do that if you actually have buy-in, right? If people aren't involved in the planning process, if they haven't decided this really is like this map, this plan is what we're going to do, then when a shining object comes up, even if you have a plan, they're going to say they're not committed to it. They don't really believe in it. That's sort of like the top-down value of it. Also at the bottom, though, like sort of getting all of your staff involved, the best way to do planning is to make it a whole company or whole organization effort. At least, key players, not just the top telling everyone what to do. There's another article at Philanthropy Daily titled Bottom Up Planning, and it's about involving everybody in the various departments in the process. And that way you don't sort of have this top-down demand that you have to do this, which can really build ill will at an organization. It builds trust among the staff to want to put in the investment and the hard work to reach the vision that your leaders set for you. So you get sort of like, you avoid going off the path with the leaders, and you avoid going off the path with people who, are sort of still working their way up at the company.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that real quick, if I may, Jack. You can't have too many cooks in the kitchen, of course, in the planning process. But to Austin's point, in the preparatory work, before you actually sit down in the room and start mapping out and whiteboarding where you want to go and how you're going to get there, the information gleaned from staff can be super important. Some of that can be done like through surveys. Sometimes it can be done, by departments, having kind of departmental meetings and then hearing from the staff. So that point about buy-in is really important, I think. That they have a say in the process. They may not be, the final decision makers, and they probably shouldn't be, by the way. But I think because they're the boots on the ground, like they're the closest to what is actually going to happen, and ultimately they're probably going to be executing, significant portions of a plan. So on the front end of the process, getting, their thoughts, their ideas, it can be super, super valuable.
Back to you, Austin. We had a question. I think this came from staff. I'm not sure internally, but since you just mentioned Drucker and planning versus plan, but the question is there a difference between a strategy and a plan? That's a two-part question. And should they be developed as separate entities or merged into one? So maybe you want to answer that, and then Doug, after that, maybe we should get into how a plan is done, organizations that have and don't have, likely outcomes. But Doug, maybe you can also just a little bit, what kind of different plans are there? There are a couple different. Anyway, Austin, what about those two questions? What's your take?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You definitely could have a plan without a strategy, right? We're going to do these kinds of things without sort of tying them together to where you're going. You could have a strategy, right? we're going to become the biggest soup kitchen in the Northeast corridor, serving this many people, and we're going to do that by reaching cultural influencers, right? That would be a strategy, and then you don't have any plans to get you there. So you could do both. It'd be really bad to do just one without the other. Though you do see it pretty frequently. That's why we always refer to strategic planning, whether it's a strategic organizational plan, a strategic development plan, strategic marketing plan, whatever it is. The point is that it needs to be a strategic plan that has has a clear goal of where you want to get to, the clear high-level strategies to get you to that goal, and then the planning phase is sort of like tedious working out of task after task after task that's going to bubble up to ultimately achieving your high-level goal. So they are different, but they should definitely be rolled into one thing.
Before we get into the zoology of plans, Doug, I do want to say to our people who are watching that on November 4th, you two will be hosting a master class, one of American Philanthropic's In the Trenches master classes, development planning for your nonprofit organization. It's from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. That's on November 4th. If you go to Center for Civil Society website, which is centerforcivilsociety.com, I think you can type it, hit return, and scroll down a little bit and look for the In the Trenches master classes, and you'll get more information about that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And then also, Doug, before you get to the zoology, and I'm going to, how many organizations, you've had to guess, how many nonprofit organizations do you come into contact with, existing organizations, not trying to get off the ground, they're existing, that do not have strategic plans? And Austin, your take on that too. What do you think of percentages? Like, what's your gut tell you?
That's a good question. I would say probably around 50%, maybe a little bit more. Now, I think they have parts of strategic plans. Yeah. I think they oftentimes they have had a strategic plan, but actually having a current strategic plan that they're executing and following. Yeah. Just in my limited experience, a few data points, it's probably less than 50% at any given time. So now I think a lot of organizations do set goals and objectives on a year-by-year basis. I mean, you see that a lot, as they should, right, by the way. But we are operating under a 5-year strategic plan. Usually, at least when we've come in and have begun to work with organizations, they haven't it's not like they just are rolling off a strategic plan, they're ready for the next one. It's usually they haven't had one for a while. Right.
So you think the same thing, Austin? Is that your gut?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I was turning around to grab our fundraising survey that we do every year, because this question comes up. We're in the middle of the survey right now, so we'll share more about that information at the end. But when we poll a couple of hundred nonprofits, overall 80% say they do have a strategic plan. So that's higher than Doug's 50, but these are specific organizations. It's sort of it's skewed data. It's organizations that we know, that we're talking with, that respond to surveys. But also I have a lot of clients who have strategic plans. And like Doug said, they're not actually strategic plans. They're better than nothing, but they're not quite what we mean by having a full-blown plan, which we'll get into in a minute. So I would say at best 50% have strategic plans that they've really gone through the process, and then even smaller that continue to pay attention to it. The really interesting stat, though, that comes out of our survey, every year we've done it, is so we scale them by size of the organization. And the most interesting part of it is that every organization over $10 million has strategic plans. So it begs the correlation or causation question. Are they the sort of organizations that do that, or does doing that get you there? It doesn't matter, because either way, you want to be like that kind of organization, whether it's correlated or caused. And if you're 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 500,000, you want to be like the best kind of organizations. And that means you need strategic plans.
Well, I want to get back to you, Austin. We've got to get Doug do the zookeeping here and discuss those the types, but because you've written a piece that's essentially for Philanthropy Daily last year, and it was updated recently, or we'll call them comparable organizations, one that doesn't have a plan and one that does, and your take on how those two organizations operate differently. But Doug, briefly, or elaborate. So you outrank. You say whatever you want. Talk about what different kinds of plans there are.
Yeah, I mean, so in our work, we typically do two different types of plans. There are other plans that like one could explore, but in our work with nonprofits, we do organizational strategic plans, and we'll do specifically development plans. And to Austin's data point there of 80%, that's actually speaking, I think, more to development plans specifically, because it's actually a fundraising survey. So that's kind of owned by the development, VP or head of development. The way we think about our plan, I'll just like walk through this, because the process is very similar for both an organizational strategic plan and the development plan. The components in the process is pretty much the same. It's just that the organizational strategic plan is broader. Okay.
Right.
So, so what we look at, I mean, we ask basically questions of where you're at now, where do you want to go, how are you going to get there, and how do you know that you've arrived, okay, or have accomplished what you set out to accomplish. So, the process for us is doing an assessment. We start with an audit. Now, if it's an organizational audit, we're going to be looking at kind of the operation side leadership. Okay, we're going to, the staffing, the operations, the systems, all that. We're going to look typically at marketing communications. We're going to look at programs or services, depends on the type of organization, but what is it that they actually do, right? Why do they exist? What is it that they do day in and day out? Whether it's feeding the homeless or creating policy or anything and everything in between. And then what does the fundraising look like? Okay, and then within fundraising, we have a lot that we dig in because of our niche area of working with nonprofits on the fundraising side. But we'll look at those four broad areas, and there may be others, by the way, but those are kind of four broad sections of the organization that we'll look at for an organizational strategic plan. And what we'll do is we have a whole series of questions. We'll interview staff, we interview management and leadership. In some cases, we'll interview board members and donors, significant partners, to see where they're at. So we kind of look under the hood, see, how's their database working? What programs do they do? What do they say that they do compared to what they actually do, versus this is actually what's really intriguing and I find most interesting is what people think they do. All right. So what do they publicly say? What is it that they're actually doing? And then what do people think? And, does it correlate? Is it in line? In our process, we'll go through, and I'll speak to development, specifically a development plan in a second. But what we'll do is we'll go through that process, and we'll have a series of findings. So we say, here's what we found, here's what we heard, right? And recommendations within those four broad areas, kind of operations, staffing, leadership, operations, marketing, communications, development, program, services. And it just inevitably, if you talk with enough folks, read the documents, look at, dig in, things begin to crystallize, right? You see patterns, you see where there's contrast, like, you hear people like, wow, everyone is in agreement on this one thing, or wow, half the people say this and half the people say that. And that's super informative to go into the planning process. Okay. So we'll use that. That becomes a basis for conversation to say, okay, well, where do you want to go? Like, what is it you want to accomplish? Always, and this is really, really, really important, tied to mission. In our work, oftentimes when we do a planning, it's a time to take a step back and actually look at why is it you exist? Why do you do what you do? And so we often spend at the outset looking at vision and mission before we even get into like the goals and objectives, because we want to say, well, what does the world look like? What does your state look like? Your community? You fill in the blank, but like what if you're executing your mission, what is it that you're ultimately like aiming toward?
I have to interrupt, but do
Yeah.
you find that is an unnerving, and Austin too, do you find when that basic thing comes up that might be unnerving to the leadership of organizations? They might have an inexplicable to explain clearly why they exist or what their mission is. Have you found that?
I'd say it's, sometimes there's a little resistance because it's like, well, why do we have to do that? And we know our mission, but it's really intriguing because it's illuminating, I guess. And I think it actually at the end, if it's done right, can be really productive. And sometimes it's just clarification and refinement, like just a sharpening of the mission statement to really reflect what it is that they're doing. And that helps with fundraising, of course, right? So my experience, there might be a little hesitancy on the front end, but on the back end, typically it's actually a really useful exercise.
Okay. I agree. It's why, again, the actual planning process is so valuable in getting buy-in there. Like if the board, the leadership don't want to be involved in the process, they want to hire a firm to just put a plan together. Then when you start asking that question, they're going to be resistant. They're like, we know our mission. We told you to put together a plan. And that would actually be a plan without a strategy, actually. But if they're involved and you work your way into this, then it works. Then they're open to it. It's also why the interviews are so important. A couple months ago was telling a board of a big nonprofit exactly this, that they need to take the time to think through their mission and vision. They told me they knew it, but I was fortunate to be able to tell them that I interviewed every single one of them. And of 14 board members, I got roughly 15 different answers as to what they did. And they said that we know what we do. I said, no, you don't. And they started to answer it, and it became clear in the room that they didn't know what they did. And because they were, bought into the fact that this mattered, that we wanted to do this, it hurts a little bit, to pull that up. Planning is always you need to be honest, you need to be willing to like ask the hard questions and expose what's not working. So it hurts, but it's, it's sort of pain on the way to getting better.
Well, let's get into go ahead, Doug.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, well, never mind. We'll continue on.
Okay. Well, let's it'd be interesting to talk about briefly the actual, what we sort of did already, but you want to elaborate any more on the actual process. But then, Austin, I'd like to get back to something. So here's that piece I mentioned before that you wrote for Philanthropy Daily and has been updated. Here's what you wrote. What distinguished, you had two organizations comparable. One has a strategic plan, the other does not. What distinguished the successful from the unsuccessful organizations? Strategic planning. You've heard us say it before, and you'll hear us say it again. The main thing separating successful nonprofits from unsuccessful ones is strategy and planning. So Austin, that's pretty black and white. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, if you will, but I'm interested also from you and from Doug that organizations that did not have a plan, for whatever reason, the grace of God or the wisdom you imparted to them, realized, okay, we should do this, did it, embraced it, and then looked back and said, what the hell were we doing not having had a strategic plan? So anyway, Austin, talk about the piece you wrote, and if you want to get any actual experiences with people, the light coming on for people.
Yeah, so I did just update it as we're sort of now a year after I wrote it the first time and reposted it. But I put it up last year in the fall as we sort of thought we were coming out of the pandemic and looking at how organizations fared. Obviously, I jumped the gun on that judgment. But, just knowing, we work with American Philanthropic, we work with, over 100 organizations. So we had a broad sort of scale to look at. And so I picked two organizations, one that I knew was thriving right then, and one that I was working with that it wasn't going very well. I changed the names, anonymized everything, but every word of it's true. I checked with everybody there and made sure it all checked out. And what happened is the one with the plan could deal with the sudden and profound uncertainty of lockdowns and a pandemic and keep fundraising, keep growing. The other one didn't know what to do, and they were sporadic and haphazard, and they started to suffer a great deal. Immediately after that piece, we did their strategic plan, and they're now on track. They're now doing a lot better. But there, there's a long way to go to recover from that. I'd be really curious, actually, if, anybody listening in, please write to me and let me know if you've fared very well through the last 2 years without a strategic plan. Let me know. I'd be really curious to hear about it. I'd like to talk about how that happened. One of the things that happens is, even if you're doing well, it tends to be haphazard. You're likely having employee burnout, or at least like employee dissatisfaction, which is going to lead to burnout. Maybe not. You also might have other support on the back end, but it would be interesting to figure out how other organizations are achieving that, if they are. It is a bit black and white, Jack, to say that that's the main thing. I don't know. I would think about it, it's a bit rhetorically overstated maybe, but it's essential. I guess the main thing is having a good mission and a leader who really believes in that mission, but strategy follows immediately from that position.
Yeah. Well, it may not, Austin, it may not only be, unsuccessful may be a harsh word, maybe a truthful word, but maybe harsh. The other thing, though, may be opportunity costs, like you're leaving money on the table, right? Yeah, you're doing okay, but you know what? If you had a strategic plan, you may have been, of different order of effective organization. Anyway, any other thoughts before Doug? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'd say, there was a lot of comments, commentary like, oh, when the pandemic hit, throw your strategic plan out the door, right? It's useless now, and this and that. And I tend to disagree with that.
You mean COVID related? Doug?
Yeah, COVID related. And here's an example. So say you're an organization and you're working with students, right? And one of your objectives, hypothetically, is to engage X number of students, and maybe your way to do that's through in-person events around the country on college campuses, as an example. Okay, so COVID hits. What do you do? The question is like, okay, what you want to do, which is engage students for whatever purpose, is that still valid? Like, is it still worthwhile, right? Does it still help you fulfill your mission, whatever your mission is? Most likely, probably the answer is yes, right? But the question becomes, how do you do it? And a good plan, if you have like that objective, you can then take a look back and say, okay, well, we need to tack. Maybe instead of doing in-person events, we're going to do virtual events, or we're going to pivot, right? So like, you're still moving forward for what it is you want to accomplish. Right. And importantly, the why, right? You always have to start with a why with your plan, and then move to the how and the what, and et cetera, et cetera. But you have to start with the why. And if that's valid, I think a plan gives you kind of the framework to make decisions where you might have to jettison something. Right. But you can still say, okay, but now we're gonna tack, we're gonna pivot, or maybe you do something later that you would have, or you do something sooner that you were planning to do, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, and you're going to do it sooner because of the circumstances, or vice versa. That's what I like about a plan. We always talk about plans being living documents. Mm-hmm. Right? They set some guardrails, right? But you don't know you don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now, 12 months from now. There might be unimaginable opportunities presented to you, right? Or you could have really significant setbacks. But even having a plan in that moment, it's going to help you in your decision making.
Right. Yeah. The point of a plan is never to be a slave to the written word. The point of a plan is that when uncertainty strikes and you need to be nimble, you have something to be nimble with. So like the plan, the organization in that document that had a plan, the point is every single piece of their plan they pivoted on, right? Because they had to. The world was a completely different place, but they weren't guessing into the unknown. They were sort of looking into the unknown with some solid ground to stand on. And they said, we wanted to do this, but it has to look like this now. And it makes it a lot easier, a lot lower stress, and at least in the way I've seen, a lot more successful.
Again, we'll get to the, kind of the basics of how this goes down with an organization. But as I mentioned before, I am on or have been on a number of boards that have not had and whose leadership even seems reluctant to even take on a strategic plan for whatever biases, presumptions they may have. Maybe, oh my God, I don't have time or money or whatever. But what do you, my colleagues, you too, my friends and colleagues, what do you hear in your experience are the main reasons why people say, nah, we're not going to do a strategic plan? Not that you're, trying to hard sell, but if it comes up in conversation, what are the typical reasons why organizations don't do them?
Time and money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is. It's going to be, they take time to do well. You have to slow down. You have to create space, and then in unbelievably busy world in which we live. And you have to have the mental space and basically a discipline and dedication to the process. And then the other is the money. If you bring in now, I mean, I would, whether it's American Philanthropic or somebody else, it's really beside the point. I mean, of course, we'd love to get business and work with clients and help them. But at the end of the day, I do think having some sort of objective third party is valuable, just to come in and ask questions and have a perspective that sometimes it's harder for someone internally to maybe voice. I mean, that's really, it's not, we have a process that we follow for our strategic plans, but it's not rocket science. But you need to have some sort of objectivity and like someone that's like driving it forward. And if you bring in a third party, they're tasked with that. They're accountable to do that. It's really hard sometimes to get beyond the inertia internally to do strategic planning. But that costs money to hire someone.
Yeah. Austin, same.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Or the only thing I would add is if they already think they have one, right? This sort of like this 2-page document we've written up works. And again, that's better than nothing, right? We've got a budget and we've got some scribbles about where we're planning to go. That's loads better than having no plans at all. But oftentimes organizations think they've got a good strategic plan, and it doesn't quite muster what we really mean by that process. But they think they don't need one because they have it.
Okay. I'm wondering about an organization X that is extremely successful. It has a plan, and year one into a 3-year or 4-year plan, it's having great success. Is there a reason to rewrite a plan, to upgrade a plan, mid-plan, in the midst of success? I almost like you think like, well, the plan is the reason we are successful. But has it happened in your experience that, yeah, you've been so successful that maybe it's time to redo this or upgrade it, however you might want to put it?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I mean, nothing is static. I mean, no organization is static. Opportunities present themselves, the environment changes. I think, right now I'm talking with a client that we did a strategic plan for, and they're basically have executed the plan, and they've been successful in executing it. And they're, I think, probably a year ahead. It's like a 5-year plan, and they're 4 years in, and they feel very good about where they're at and what they've done. And so they want to go into the beginning of 2022 to do planning again. And look, it's not going to be as heavy of a lift. We spent a lot of time, talking about kind of core principles, and we did look at that vision and the mission, and that's not going to change 3 years later. All that's set. But what we want to do is look at what do they want to accomplish. What is it that they actually want to accomplish, and then what are the strategies to get there, and then break it down into the activities and the tactics to execute. That's really the key thing. So I would say, it's kind of long-winded, I realize, and I apologize, but yes, you should always be looking and revising and considering, updating your plan or having a new one.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, quarterly reviews at least, but at least annually, it should be not just a review, but like a full, adjust the goals for the year ahead. So, and they should bubble up pretty easily. So you don't have to go task by task for the whole thing. Our plans tend to be very long, but the high level, like your key metrics or your KPIs that you have at the top to let you know that you're successful, you want to do a goal versus actual at the end of the year. And then based on that difference, update the next year's goals. So if we just last year, even through COVID, with one organization, they hit their 3-year goal after their first year. So we can't work on the same process anymore. They're like their bottom line budget is the same as, their goal is lower than that. So we had to update everything going out. That's not an onerous process though. It takes some time and thinking, but you definitely need to adjust your goals and think about, why are they going up or down? Are we adjusting our goals down because we made a mistake in the planning process, or because we're making a mistake over the course of the year? Is something not working? Is something a bad idea? And change those things accordingly. But in the middle of the plan, it's usually not a full rewrite or something. It's just tweaking and changing goals.
Guys, I'd like to remind our folks who are watching again that on November 4th, there is a masterclass for those who might have joined a little later, development planning for your nonprofit organization. Doug and Austin will be leading that class. This is, I think maybe that's the best place to talk about rolling up the sleeves and the nitty gritty of doing a strategic plan. I don't want to, again, I feel like this is such a hard task, pushing a rock up a hill. But it's work, right? I mean, as you said, time and money, but yeah, an organization that's doing X must take more time to do, but it's an investment of time that's going to pay off in the end. So,
yeah. And I mean, just real quickly, Austin, you made a comment about the process itself. I think you're referring to the quote from Drucker, but there's something just like uncanny about the process. There's something just very strange and weird to like go through that process, to write it down. I don't know if there's something in the deep recesses of our brain, like subconsciously, that you execute. Like, it's just, I've seen it time and time and time again. It's like, not that everything's perfect, but like when you go through the process and you put it on paper, something happens. I don't know what that is or why that is, but I've seen it time and time again with organizations where they put it on paper, they tend to hit their goals. And I'm not just saying like put it on paper and, like you said at the beginning, like, put it in the drawer, but like actually think about the plan, because what happens is you start making like small decisions, right? And the accumulation of those small decisions are like towards a certain goal. I don't know. It's uncanny. Like,
it's something like you get a feel for the whole, which we never get to do, right? It's not as if everybody has their head down and they're distracted in a problematic way. But, however many things you're doing, you never get a chance to stop and say, let's look at everything, whether everything refers to the organization, just development, just marketing, just personnel, whatever sort of plan you're doing, you're looking at that department or that thing as a whole and imagining all the pieces coming together, right? And so if something clicks there, I think. And then similarly, like I said, it motivates and gets buy-in from everybody, which if you're working for a nonprofit, hopefully you believe in, you love your mission, you're excited to work and advance that thing. But something about stopping and looking at it sort of like reinvigorates and says, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly where I'm going. Now I really want to do this thing. And so it spruces staff to want to fight for the mission again.
I want to tell you, repeat though, from my own experience, before I came to American Philanthropic, as you know, I was at National Review, and I was actually trustee of National Review Institute, which is a not for profit. And NRI came into existence in 1992 or 93, and did not have a strategic plan for 20 years. And it was a very much seat of the pants, just going along. Somebody's got a good idea now. I mean, it was just existing. And the difference a strategic plan made was just terrific, phenomenal. But so I just want to state that. I mean, I've lived it. But I'm wondering, Doug, because you mentioned putting it on paper, I'm wondering if that is maybe down deep and people who are reluctant to do a strategic plan. Is that maybe a reason for not wanting to do one? Because the putting it on paper, it actually has, it's a mission. Here's where we're going. But on the downside, for some people, it could be, well, oh, there's accountability here, and my performance may be tied to this written document.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to it. Yeah, when you put it on paper and you share it, especially if the board is aware and you set certain goals and objectives and it's stated, it's out there now, and people remember that, and you have to like work towards it. So there absolutely is a level of accountability. And so there might be. I mean, I haven't had someone ever tell me like, well, I don't want to put that down because I don't want to be accountable. But I think probably at some level, there could be a hesitancy sometimes to do a plan, because when you do it, you say it, it's like anything. You tell somebody that you're going to do something, then you feel an obligation that you have to actually do it. Yeah. So, right. If you think it's one thing, no one knows. When you say it and you put it out there publicly, then you have to, it's out there. So you're going to be, measured and judged by it. So there certainly could be that, but I do think on the positive side, when it does happen, at least in my experience working with a number of clients, and the meetings I have with them, you mentioned National Review Institute, just, that my experience there, like every time I'd go up, Lindsay would have the plan there. Like we'd go over it, we'd measure it, we'd take a look. And, I think, and then I know decisions were being made outside my purview that were actually in line with those plans, but like, it was just something that we'd review, we'd take a look at it. And I've had this experience with a number of clients where, it's a guiding document and you can go back to it. I mean, Austin, you said you don't want to be slavish to it, and I agree with that 100%, but it does help focus time, energy, effort, resources in a specific period of time. And that's the key thing. It's time bound. A strategic plan's time bound, and it can be super helpful.
Well, we have a question. Sorry, I'm getting old, folks. Would your approach to creating a strategic plan be different if you don't plan to be with the organization next year and you're not sure what their staffing situation will be? I guess that's what applies to someone who's in leadership of an organization.
Yeah. Also, you can go ahead. I mean, I have thoughts on that, but I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. So, I mean, personnel's policy is a sort of phrase, trope in the management world, and planning what you're going to do without knowing who's going to be there is really hard. That said, if it's a leadership position, part of the plan is going to take into account who needs to be there. We often end up saying in a plan, you need to hire another MGO, or you need somebody to manage your database, because if you don't have clean data, you can't keep growing. So the staffing is going to be a part of it. And we'll just beg the questions if there's it might clarify that answer, I guess is what I'm saying. And if there's financial burdens on getting the staff you need, then the plan's all the more important to figure out how you're going to solve that problem of not being able to get the staff that you need. And what do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, it does pose a challenge. I think if you're in like the head of the organization, it begs the question of, is there a succession plan, in place? Mm-hmm. And because you do need to have the right folks. But I also think you can think of in terms of, okay, here are the type of positions that we need. I've worked with a number of organizations where, it's unknown who's actually going to fill it, but the planning process itself can sometimes determine what positions are needed, or if there needs to be changes. I wouldn't, here's what I'd say. I wouldn't let that completely stop you from beginning the process. There might be details, it might be a little bit prolonged, it might be a little bit open-ended, and you have to revisit it at some point. But I think the danger is, here's what happens all the time. We see this in a number of areas in organizations, is everyone waits for the star, the sun, the moon, stars to align perfectly. And then at that point in time, they're going to do whatever it is, right? They're going to do strategic planning.
Yeah.
That never happens. Never happens. I've yet to see it happen. I don't expect in my lifetime I will ever see like everything to be perfectly aligned. So I'm I kind of I'm a fan of and tend towards like action and doing things. And so my encouragement would be begin the process, even if it's not completed, because otherwise, something else is going to come along that, might be an excuse not to do it.
And definitely don't leave that information out. Like that can always be a hard thing to share with your board, as our interviews are confidential. So that could be a good place to do it, but it'll be hard to say, hire a new CEO next year if the board doesn't know that. But if you want to plan and you really care about the organization, you have to be transparent about where your plans, if they're plans to leave.
Well, we're here to we're approaching the end of our hour here. We're not here to hard sell anyone, but American Philanthropic does, of course, engage in strategic planning and helping organizations do that. But from my experience, as mentioned before, with National Review Institute was ongoing. But I'm wondering, most people that we have dealt with help create the strategic plan. It's usually the case, Austin, yes or no, that along the way, yeah, we're there for that quarterly review to help remind to do it, to work through it, to review it. That's part of what we do typically, correct?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. You want the quarterly review with the board. The quarterly review with the board would be a lot, but annual review with the board would be good.
I think we lost Jack.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can.
And 4 minutes to end. We have one question.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if there are other Q&A, we can put them in there. I mean, just a couple other thoughts. I'll just rip here for a second. And if there's a specific question, we're happy to address it. I don't know if I've ever worked with an organization that at the end of the process, they say, wow, that was a waste of time. I really wish we hadn't done a strategic plan, whether it's an organizational plan or a development plan. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite, is that it's very illuminating. It is certainly beneficial. I think the rubber meets the road and making sure that the plan is actionable. So one of the things, the way we think about it is like, what's your vision? What's your mission? What is the actual thing? Some statement, when I say thing, like your landmark goal, a statement of what you want to accomplish or where you want your organization to be, or if it's a development plan, a statement about your fundraising operations over a period of time. And then from that, you can have a series of objectives that kind of show like how you track against that. And then you develop your strategies. And here's an important thing with regard to strategies is they should be by through statements. You're going to do X by Y. You're going to do A through B. That's actually, I think, an important formulation of the actual statement. Otherwise, it's not really a strategy. And then the rubber meets the road in breaking down those strategies into the tactics, assigning them, and putting a timetable to them. And that's really that's actually what's driving the plan on a month in, month out basis, quarter in, quarter out basis, is people having ownership of specific components of the plan. And that's where you track, like, okay, did we do these events? Did we get these mailings out? Did we do what we said we're going to do, and who's responsible? And that's really where the power, I think, of a strategic plan comes in, is actually at the execution level of having documents that can be tracked and followed by the staff.
I'm sorry I disappeared there. I don't know.
Welcome back.
The Broadmoor Wi-Fi disappeared. Hey, we have 1 minute left. I have to do this, guys. I don't have to, but I want to. Again, on the Center for Civil Society website, you'll find the links for the upcoming masterclass. But there's also on Monday, we'll be having a webinar on Should Philanthropies Be Permanent, with Dick DeVos, Heather Higgins, and John J. Miller, and I'll be hosting that webinar. And then you'll also find a link for the conference that the center is holding on November 17th in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's about restoring American community. It's our initial kickoff conference for givers, doers, and thinkers. So please check out the information there. Please consider joining us. We'll send links to folks who are here to the master class, to those events, to civil thoughts, etc. Anything else before we leave, guys, that you'd like to say, other than thank you to folks who participated?
I'm all set. Thank you. I have a lot more to say, but we're under the burden of time and reality.
Yeah, I would just say for whoever was on this webinar, Scotch Talk discussion, first of all, thanks for being here. And if you have other specific questions, feel free to reach out. I mean, my email is doug@americanphilanthropic.com, and I'd be happy to answer questions over email, set up a time to talk. There might be, a particular situation, for you and your organization that you'd like to address. I'm happy to have that conversation if useful.
Jeremy, I hope we did all right in your big shoes. Thanks so much. Austin, thank you. Doug, thanks. To Jacob, Katie, who helped, thanks everybody. And stay tuned a few weeks from now for the next Scotch Talks. Adios.
All right.
Great.
Cheers.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Jack.
Jack.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks.
Bye.